Greetings, this is Artie from Artifact Electronics. First of all, sorry for the reduced frequency of new videos from me, but things have been kind of busy. You would think that with the pandemic I would have a lot more time, essentially being under house arrest here, kind of. But last December a friend of mine asked me to help out on a project for a few weeks, and I agreed. And now that we're towards the end of July, I'm still on that project, and it's taken up a lot of my time. So there's my excuse. I actually had another excuse that I made up, but you know, my audience is intelligent, they won't believe it. But so here's how it went. My camera broke, and it took a while for me to fix it. And now obviously it's fixed. So I hear all of you saying, well, show me a video of you fixing the camera. Duh, how can I show you a video of fixing the camera when I had to take it apart? But anyway, that sounds too unbelievable anyway, so here's my excuse. So let's dive right into it. I bought something new for us to fix. And the postman brought the box. So let's open her up. So anyway, the title kind of gives it away, but let's pretend nobody read the title. This is a kit that somebody put together, and it didn't work right. And they decided to sell it. That smells good. Let me describe. If your smell-o-vision isn't on, it. How should I say that? It kind of smells like a basement that has been wet for a really long time. I know, disgusting, but ugh. No, I'm not wearing gloves, but yeah, let's just take it all out. PU. So anyway, what this is, it's a reproduction front panel for a Digital Equipment Corporation PDP8 computer. The PDP8 came out in 1965, and it was the first mini computer of substance. I think it came with, let's see, it's a 12-bit machine, came with 4K of memory, and when it came out in 65, it cost $18,500, which is like $150,000 today. But anyway, somebody decided to reproduce the front panel for it. And it looked kind of cool. So let's see what all we get. But keep in mind, this is somebody else bought this, and they were unable to get it to work right. I mean, they said that 2 of the LEDs don't work, and the seller said they are unable to diagnose and fix this, so they're selling it. Okay, so the front panel, still new, has a protective sheet on it, but let's peek. This is probably the main reason why I got it, because I looked it up on a website, and front panel looked really neat. By the way, the website will be listed in the description. It's obsolescenceguaranteed.com, which is the website of the person who built this. So as you can see, it's a reproduction of the front panel. The front panel being basically the I/O. I mean, the display, the keyboard. I mean, initially it came out and it only had this front panel with a bunch of switches down here that you use to program this thing. Similar to the Altair, except it came, what, about 10 years or so before the Altair. and it was an industrial computer. I'm going to leave this protective sheet on here. I don't want to be scratching that up because this front panel was probably the neatest part of it all. And then going on, more smelly stuff, bubble wrap. But here's the front panel, and it's a bunch of LEDs and switches. And the other thing that interested me, these switches, which are, I mean, this is smaller, this is a scaled down version of the original, but you know, these are the switches they used. You can either toggle them on and off, or some of these are just momentary close spring-loaded switches. But I guess the person who designed this found a source for these switches, bought a bunch of them, and started to make a kit. I mean, I looked around. It's not easy to find. I mean, I didn't find any of these switches. And they look a little small, but even being fat-fingered as I am, I seem to be able to push them without pushing 3 at once and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of LEDs that'll show you what's going on in the computer, and here's your keyboard. But what do I want to do with the front panel? Well, the PDP8, which sold about 50,000 units, was rather popular. So a lot of people started to write simulators for it. And so the reason this was made is many simulators exist for this. And upon examining the back of this, there's a Pi on here. And having read the web page, I mean, the original doesn't come with a Pi, but you can get the Pi and you can download the a Raspbian image with the emulator on it, which looks like it's conveniently included. And so this, in fact, is a functionally equivalent PDP8. So let's see what else came with it. So it comes with this bamboo case, a bunch of blocks here for, I guess, mounting it in the case, and then once it's securely mounted, you put this thing on, and then you have a PDP8. And what else? Bag of screws and some spare parts, and that's it. Well, wait a minute. Let me check in the box. There's supposed to be a power supply. Oh, and here it is. This is one of the supplies that comes with a Raspberry Pi. So let's go ahead and plug this in and see what it does. I'm not going to bring it up I'm not going to bring it up slowly on the auto transformer because it runs off of 5 volts. So what could go wrong, right? Before plugging it in, I actually went ahead and pulled the Raspberry Pi. Can you see that? No. So it's a Pi 3 Model B, version 1.2. So it's not that old. And one thing I did notice when looking on the back, it's the soldering on it is really bad. There's all sorts of flux residue, uneven things sticking up in the air, some things that look like they're not even soldered correctly, which means some of the leads are sticking through. Oh, of course, here there's 2 leads sticking out. So yeah, that's going to need some work. But first, let's go ahead and plug this guy in, see if he does anything. no on-off switch here, so I guess we plug power into the Pi. Can't see it from there, but a red and a green light lit up on the Pi, which means it's doing something. Probably going to take a little bit of time for it to load up, and or it's going to take forever and it doesn't do anything. But oh, it did something. It's kind of hard to see on the camera, but let's do this. Come on. See, you kind of see that there's blinky lights. I think that's showing the status of what the, so it's actually, so it's running, and I still don't have any idea what to do with this. I don't know the instruction set. I don't know how to toggle code into it, but I will know. And the first thing, I briefly looked at some docs, is, you know, you can stop execution. And this front panel, you know, tells you what each button does, but since it's still covered with the protective paper, and yes, I'm not going to open that thing up before I'm sure that this thing works correctly, but they've conveniently labeled on the PCB what the function of the buttons are, and there is a stop and a continue button here. So if we talk, that's momentary, and it doesn't do anything. Stop. So there's a single step over here. That doesn't do anything. Oh, this stops it. And then we take it out of single step mode, it's still stopped. So let's see if the continue button does anything. Yeah, it runs again. But, alright, as you saw before, it's pretty crappy soldering work on this. We may have some things that aren't connected right. And I guess I should be checking the buttons for operation too. So one of the things I usually don't do is buy kits that were assembled and are getting sold because they can't get them to work. I mean, it's usually a nightmare scenario. You buy a Heath kit that is like built and like, yeah, it's 99.5% built, but it doesn't run. Well, I don't know. Did you use a cattle prod to solder this? Which this kind of looks like the back of it. The problem with that is also these switches are kind of sensitive. If you heat them for too long, something separates inside of them and they stop working. So we may have a dead switch here, or many dead switches, but before I can stop execution, I can't really test any of the switches, and I don't even know which LEDs to expect to light up or not, because I don't know what's running in here. So I think the next step is to heat up the iron and resolder the connections. And or even before that, do a cheap test and see if at least if we can light up the LEDs by removing the Pi and then basically applying a voltage to each LED and seeing if it lights up. Because if it's not running, you give it your 5 volts or 3.3 volts or whatever, connect it correctly, and the LED should light up. And if it doesn't, then the LED is dead. Now, this happens very rarely that an LED dies, but it does happen. So let's get set up to test the LEDs. So I went to the website and I actually found a schematic of the front panel. And it seems that the LEDs are multiplexed, and what that means is that instead of using a data bit from the Pi, one data bit for every LED, you can't do that because there's too many LEDs on there. So what they do is they scan the LEDs which means they're in a row column configuration. And if a particular column is turned on, then they read 8 bits. And those 8 bits, that and the column that they turned on, will define if any of the switches, well, what the state is, whether they're open or closed. But in this case, since they are, you can see it up here, like the anodes of these LEDs are all tied together. So all we got to do is power the anodes, and I'm going to use a 9-volt battery, and the anode is connected. Remember that LED that didn't have the leg snip? I'm just going to clip onto that, and then basically see if these first 8 or however many light up. Now notice I have a resistor on here, and with 9 volts, I'm just to make sure, I'm using a 1K resistor. It's not going to make a very bright LED, but it's safe. And remember, I also said LEDs very rarely go bad. Well, there's one easy way to burn out an LED, and that is to power them up without this resistor. If you put 5 volts or 3.3 volts straight into an LED, I mean, these yellow LEDs have a forward voltage of about 1.9 volts. And if there's no dropping resistor in line, the LED essentially acts as a camera flash, i.e. it gets very bright and then it dies forever. So if testing LEDs or doing this, make sure you get a dropping resistor. So now, let's see if that even shows up on camera. But yeah, it sure does. I mean, this lead is clipped really close, but okay, so that LED's good, that one's good. So anyway, I'm not going to bore you with that. I'm going to go through all of the LEDs, and if any of them don't come on, I mean, they're either not connected properly or they've been burned out. So let me do that off camera because that's kind of boring. Okay, done with the LED test. I marked them. We got 3 LEDs that don't come on when you apply voltage to them. Next we have to test the switches. That's a bit of a pain because they're really hard to clip onto on the back, because for some reason the leads were cut really short and there's a lot of solder on it and everything slips off. But basically, to tell you, I did get the meter and it came off. I'll plug the meter to the common. Let's see, there's a common here. Are we shorting? No, which is the center pin. And what I'm going to do is test the switch that prompted all of this, and that is the stop switch. And we can see, oh, you can't see me do that. So the switch works, but there's probably a break somewhere on the board. And I'll have to go ahead and do that to all of the switches. Let's see, I think the first 2, the switches are also scanned, so let's see if that works. Yes, that's the first one. Second one. This one we already know. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that one's on a different column. So again, I'll do that off camera and just go through all the switches and see if mechanically or the switch itself works, and then take it from there. Yep, there's one bad switch. You guessed it, this one. It's permanently closed. Doesn't matter which way you toggle it. It toggles kind of lightly. So something may be out of kilter in there. So what I'm going to have to do next is take this switch off and see if I can fix it. And then basically do some signal tracing and see why the stop switch isn't connected to anything. Actually, I'm probably using the schematic, which pretty clearly lays out what's going on. Make sure that every switch and every LED is properly connected to its respective row and column. And yeah, that's just continuity. So let's see what that results in. Alright, so I spent a good amount of time cleaning up this side of the board. Normally when you touch up solder joints, it's because you suspect they're dry or you can see they're cracked and all of that. This was the opposite because I think I removed like 28 pounds of solder from this board. And then it became a big sticky mess. There was flux or whatever the original solderer used, and it was pretty sticky. It's kind of clean right now. It's not 100%. It needs to be washed, but I don't want to wash it because I'm afraid to damage the switches if I immerse them. So I basically did the IPA and Kim wipes routine and just cleaned up as much as I could. Found some odd looking connections. So the main thing I found was this switch has come back to life. These two LEDs were removed and they are dead. This one came back to life. Just reheating the solder joints. So I need to replace these two. But I did find something really interesting, and I'm going to have a difficult time showing this to you. But let's try anyway. Come on. Yeah, this is like nearly impossible. Yeah, you can see, I'll see the third on it. So I can't get close enough, but what I found, which you can't really see, but basically there's a trace coming out of this solder connection and then going along this trace and connecting to the sixth resistor down here. Well, it looks like somebody's tool slipped and blew a hole into the trace. You can kind of see it here. Just blew straight through the trace. So it was disconnected. So I fly wired it, and at least let's see if that makes any difference. Remember, that was the stop key. And see if that stops it. Now, you know, the light really shows you the white discoloration here, which is still, I mean, at least it's not sticky anymore, but it is discolored from the flux or whatever was used on here. And that's about the best I can get it. But it's going to be hidden in the case. Nobody's going to see it. Alright, let's see if we achieved anything at all by cleaning things up. So plug in. Start cleaning up. Come on. Did I break it? No, I didn't break it. So, the big test then is, does the stop key work? And it does. Very nice. And the continue key makes it run again. And you can see that this one LED that is covered up is now working. Alright, so I got to replace these two LEDs. And then we can actually, maybe then we can actually test this thing and see if it does anything. Oh, and yes, this switch started to work. Did I say that already? So I guess it was bridged underneath. So let me remove the defective tag. Oh, and there's actually an easy test here. Now that I have the LEDs removed, let me see if I just hand insert something here, if that LED starts doing anything. But see, we don't know if that is lighting up right now. Oh, see that? Looks like it's on permanently. It's interesting. This one probably won't, because it's labeled USB, so I think that only comes on when there's actually USB COM, when you're using a USB to serial cable, and so that one we don't know, but this one obviously works. I got to be careful because I have, what do I have? I have two actually. There were 3 extra LEDs, but one of them didn't work when I tested it. So this one, let's see if this one works too. We know that that's doing something. And yeah. Come on. So this one lights up too. So I'll put that one in. And then I'll go read up a little bit on it so I can do something on this that kind of makes sense and leads us towards testing. Well, I spent some time making another few passes on the PCB, cleaning it up. I mean, that thing was a sticky mess. I replaced the LEDs and they're all working now. Now, this thing's, of course, I was hoping I could mount it in the nice bamboo case it comes with. But the problem is the case has no holes in it. You have to drill holes, you have to use wooden blocks to mount this thing in it. And since I'm tired, and I want to finish this video, I'm not going to ruin the box. So here it is in its full glory with the front panel attached with 2 rubber bands for now. But the main thing we want to do is, yeah, we see blinking lights, but we have no idea what it's doing. Can we tell it to do something and verify that it actually works? Okay. Alright, let's go ahead and program this thing. I don't know if you know anything about assembly language. It would help a great deal if you did. As a matter of fact, you're not going to know what the hell I'm talking about if you don't know assembly, but let's go ahead anyway. You can see the results, and that'll prove to us that this thing's working. So just briefly, there's a lot to be explained about this, but there's no time in this video, so I'm just going to do it very quickly. What we're going to do, okay, the very first thing is we got to stop this thing from executing. So it's just sitting there. So the very first program is going to be two instructions. Increment Accumulator at location 0, and then location 1 is going to say jump back to location 0 and increment the accumulator again. So what is it going to do? It's going to sit there forever incrementing the accumulator, and we should see that happen in this row over here, which is the accumulator, 12 bits by the way, and the link field, which is not a link, but rather this was the carry flag for the accumulator. So if the accumulator exceeds 4095, when it goes to 4096, this is almost like another bit. This is like bit 13 almost, but not quite. But it'll show us if a carry was generated by the previous add or increment or whatever instruction on the accumulator. So the way we do this, it's really, really convenient. First, we need to load an address into the program counter and tell it where we want to deposit an instruction to. These 4 groups of 3 switches specify an address, an octal. Octal meaning that each digit goes from 0 to 7. So since this is set to 0, when we say load address, we see that the program counter is zeroed out, so we are at location 0. Now what we need to do is tell it the instruction that we want to put, which is increment accumulator, and after looking that up, the code for that in octal is 7001. So we set it 7001. Then we press the deposit key, and that doesn't make you rich, but it does put the instruction 7001 in memory address 0, because all the LEDs on the memory address are off. Now notice that the program counter jumped to 1. So now we can just enter the remaining codes of our program. There's only one left, and that is jump back to 0. So when we jump back to 0, the jump instruction to 0 is 5000. Deposit that. Our program is done. We're done. Finished. Ship it. First thing we should probably do is make sure that we entered this stuff correctly. So we do a load address again, go to program counter 0, and press the examine button. And it tells us that at location 0, this one's the actual program counter, which has already gone to 1. But this is what we're actually looking at. Memory address 0, 7001. That's correct. And then we can examine our last instruction, which was the jump instruction, which is 5000. So when we run this, what should happen? Well, it'll just increment the accumulator forever. And we should see the results on this row. So we got to put the address back to 0, so it starts executing from 0, and then press start. And that's what it's doing, in fact, only it's lightning fast. So we see some blinking here, but we can't actually see it count. So what we need to do is modify our program to adapt it to slow humans. And in order to do that, we need to insert a delay loop after every increment. But just to examine what's happening here, is that our memory address, note that only the first bit is flashing on and off very quickly. And that's because our program resides at 0 and 1. So we're seeing it toggle between 0 and 1, and none of the other lights are coming on because it never leaves that area. And on the memory buffer, the 5 is lit because these two are always lit because both instructions have these 2 bits set, but these 2 blink because one instruction has these set and one instruction doesn't. Confused yet? God, I'm confusing myself, but Believe me, it makes perfect sense. And then actually the LEDs over here tell you the type of instruction you're doing. You can see the jumps blinking, which is, the second instruction, which jumps back to 0. And the operator is flashing, which is the increment. It's continually fetching instructions, and it's continually executing them. And we are in run mode. Okay, so now what do we do to make this more palatable? So what we want to do here is insert a delay loop. So let's stop this, go to address 0. Our first instruction is going to be the same. And we can check that. If we do the examine, it should be 7001, which is increment accumulator. That's still there, great, and it advanced the program counter. Now what we're going to do is use a new instruction, increment and skip on 0. What that does is it increments a memory location, and if that memory location turns to 0, it basically skips the next instruction. If it's not 0, it executes normally and executes the next instruction. So the delay loop is basically what we're going to do with our next instruction is put in, we want to jump back to the increment and skip on 0, which is at location 1. And the code for that is 5001. We deposit that. Oh, I forgot the increment one. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. First, we got to enter the increment and skip on 0 instruction, which is code 2007. So what this will do is it'll increment the accumulator. No, it will increment memory location 7, and then based on the results of what's in 7, if memory location 7 went to 0, it'll skip. But if it's not 0, it should just jump back and do the increment and skip on 0 again. So next we enter a jump instruction to 1, where the increment and skip on 0 instruction is located. Deposit this. Now, if that location went to 0, it'll skip this instruction and go to the next instruction at location 3. And what we want to do there is jump back to location 0. So the whole game starts over again. Basically what happens is, so that middle loop delays things, and hopefully we can see the accumulator count up. So we still have the jump code in here. We want to jump to 5000, which is the start of the program. Deposit it. Load address 0 and start. So what do you think is going to happen? It's going to look just like before, or are you actually going to be able to discern something in the accumulator? So watch this row carefully. And look there. We can now see the accumulator count up. I mean, the first 2 bits, you can't really see anything. But then the higher the bits go, you can actually see the accumulator being counted up. And it's going to count all the way up till this thing overflows, and then just continue doing that forever and ever. Now, this is proof. Well, it's not proof. We haven't used a whole lot of instructions, but we use a jump instruction. Usually if a jump instruction works correctly, it says a lot about the health of the unit. And so I think we got a fully working PDP8 emulator sitting in front of us. And now I got to do the not so fun part and put the whole thing into the case. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and the little introduction to assembly language on the PDP8. They sold about 50,000 of these, so there's a lot of software out there. There's hard disk emulators and all sorts of stuff. Remember, there's a Raspberry Pi in here, and people have spent hours and hours of their lives making sure that software is available on the Raspberry Pi and you can run it. Someday I'll get and try out some of the neater things. All I wanted to do here is get this thing working. The last words are, I did something that really goes against my grain, and that is buying an unfinished kit or a kit that didn't work. But fortunately in this case, it was just a matter of crappy soldering and some board damage. And this thing's working now. It's the ultimate blinking lights thing. I have to figure out how to drill the case, this prevents it from going into the case. I need an angled connector on the back so the power connector goes in. And that would pretty much finish it up. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's worth a thumbs up to you. Leave me a comment about what you think about this foray into antique computing. I think it's kind of neat, and I think it'll look really cool just doing dumb things like this. There's also a version of Space War running on this, and that hooks up to a monitor. That sounds really interesting. And yeah, maybe I'll get to that one day too. But yeah, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of these interesting videos. See you later.